The air in the emergency room was a symphony of managed chaos. Beeps from a dozen monitors played a frantic, arrhythmic tune. The hiss of oxygen tanks, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the clipped, urgent voices of doctors and nurses. It all blended into a single, unending hum of crisis. This was the sound of life and death being negotiated, second by second. For Nurse Alara Hayes, it was the sound of invisibility. She moved through the chaos like a ghost, her shoulders hunched, her eyes perpetually fixed on the floor tiles. Her uniform, always neat, seemed to hang on her as if she were a wireframe, not a person. A stray lock of mousy brown hair was always falling across her face, a convenient curtain to hide behind. She was the nurse who stocked the supply closets, changed the bedding on empty gurneys, and cleaned up the messes no one else wanted to touch. Her colleagues barely registered her presence. They saw her fumbling with an IV bag and sighed with impatience. They saw her jump when a code blue was called and shook their heads. They called her Mouse, sometimes to her face, sometimes just loud enough for her to hear. The nickname fit. She was quiet, skittish, and seemed to want nothing more than to disappear into the walls. Today was no different. Alara was meticulously restocking a crash cart, her movements slow and deliberate. Each item had its place. Each label faced perfectly outward. It was a small pocket of order in a world of entropy, and the task soothed the persistent tremor in her hands. "Hayes!" The voice was not a call. It was a weapon. It cut through the ER's ambient noise like a power saw through bone. Alara flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. A vial of epinephrine slipped from her grasp, hit the linoleum, and shattered. A collective groan went up from the nurses at the nearby station. Dr. Alistair Finch stood over her, a titan in pressed blue scrubs. He was the chief of trauma surgery, a man whose brilliance was matched only by his monumental ego. He was handsome in a severe, chiseled way, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a smile that never reached them. To the hospital board, he was a god, a rainmaker who brought prestige and funding. To the staff under him, he was a tyrant. He looked from the shattered vial on the floor to Alara's face, his lip curling in disgust. "Can you do nothing right? That is $100 vial of medication. Is it coming out of your paycheck, Hayes? Or should we just deduct it from the hospital's charity fund, since employing you seems to be an act of charity itself?" A few of the sycophantic residents chuckled. Chloe, a younger nurse who had always been kind to Alara, looked away, her cheeks flushing with secondhand embarrassment. "I'm sorry, doctor," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. She bent down to pick up the larger pieces of glass, her hands shaking more violently now. Finch kicked a piece of glass away with the toe of his expensive shoe. "Leave it. You'll probably just cut yourself and create another mess for a competent person to clean up. Go empty the biohazard bins. It seems to be the one task that falls within your limited skill set." He didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and strode toward the main trauma bay, his entourage of residents scrambling to keep up. The laughter died down, but the humiliation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Alara stayed crouched for a moment longer, her eyes stinging. She could feel every stare, every pitying glance, every smirk. She gathered the last of the glass shards into a dustpan and disposed of them, her movements robotic. As she passed the nurses' station, she heard one of them mutter, "I don't know why he's so hard on her. She's harmless." Another nurse, Brenda, a veteran of 20 years who had seen 100 doctors like Finch come and go, snorted. "He's a predator. She looks like prey. It's that simple." Alara pretended not to hear. She grabbed the rolling biohazard container and began her walk of shame, moving from room to room, collecting red bags filled with medical waste. It was a mindless, thankless job. It was perfect. It required nothing of her but the ability to be small and silent. She had sought this life, this quiet anonymity. She had craved the mundane routine of a civilian hospital after a lifetime spent in places where the air tasted of sand and cordite, and every sunrise was a surprise. Here, the greatest danger was a doctor's sharp tongue. Here, the only scars she had to worry about were the ones on the inside. She paused, her hand unconsciously going to her left temple, where a thin, silvery scar disappeared into her hairline. She quickly pulled her hair over it. A reminder of a different life. a life she had buried so deep she sometimes almost convinced herself it had been a dream, a nightmare. The quiet didn't last. The double doors to the ambulance bay burst open with a pneumatic sigh, and chaos flooded in. Paramedics wheeled a gurney at a near run, shouting a report over the din. John Doe, single occupant, high-speed MVC versus bridge abutment, unrestrained, GCS of 5, multiple compound fractures, suspected internal bleeding. The man on the gurney was a wreck of torn flesh and shattered bone. He was unconscious, his face a swollen mask of bruises and blood. His clothes were shredded, revealing glimpses of tactical-looking fabric and strange, non-commercial straps underneath. He had no wallet, no phone, no identification. Just a body broken on the side of a highway. Finch was on him in an instant, his arrogance replaced by a focused, predatory intensity. This was his arena. Get him into Trauma 1. Page Ortho, get me a full workup, CBC, Chem panel, and cross-match 4 units of O negative. I want a fast scan now. The team moved with practiced efficiency, a whirlwind of blue scrubs descending on the patient. They cut away the remnants of his clothing, attached him to monitors, and started multiple large-bore IVs. Alara watched from the doorway, her job simply to stay out of the way. Finch performed the focused assessment with sonography for trauma scan himself, his movements quick and sure. He pressed the ultrasound probe to the man's abdomen. No free fluid in the peritoneum. Lungs are clear. Heart looks okay. His pressure is dropping, but it's likely from the fractures. He's losing blood into his thighs. He straightened up, stripping off his gloves with a snap. His diagnosis was delivered with the finality of a judge's sentence. He's a mess, but he'll live. Probably a homeless vet, judging by the gear. We'll stabilize the fractures, hang some blood, and ship him up to the ICU. He's not worth a primetime slot in my operating room tonight. His gaze swept the room and landed on Alara. Hayes, you. Go prep him for transport. Clean him up. Make him presentable. Try not to break him any further. It was another insult, another menial task meant to demean her. But this time, Alara didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and walked toward the trauma bay. An order was an order. As the other nurses and doctors began to peel away, their attention drawn to the next incoming trauma, Alara was left alone with the John Doe. The initial storm had passed, leaving a quiet aftermath. She began her work, her hands moving with a newfound steadiness. She started by cleaning the blood from his face with a sterile cloth. As she wiped away the grime and gore, she began to see him. He was younger than she first thought, maybe early 30s. His jaw was strong, his features sharp even under the swelling. There was a discipline to his short-cropped hair, a hardness to the muscle in his arms and chest that spoke of rigorous, constant training. Her fingers, gentle and searching, moved over his body as she cleaned him, a silent assessment born of a different kind of training. She noted the pattern of his lacerations, the unnatural angles of his limbs. Then she saw it. It was almost invisible, hidden in the dirt and blood on the side of his neck. A tiny, almost imperceptible puncture wound, no bigger than a pinprick. There was no associated bleeding, just a small, dark circle with a faint ring of irritated skin around it. Her blood ran cold. Her eyes shot to the cardiac monitor. His heart rate was stable, but his blood pressure was still soft, despite the fluids. His pupils, when she checked them with her penlight, were constricted, barely reactive. Pinpoint. She felt a sudden, sickening lurch of recognition. The pinprick wound, the pinpoint pupils, the subtle, almost imperceptible rigidity she could now feel in his jaw muscles as she cleaned his face. It wasn't just trauma from the crash. It was something else. Something insidious. She had seen this exact constellation of symptoms only twice before. Once in a training simulation so realistic it gave her nightmares, and once for real, in a sun-baked village in Kandahar province. A friendly soldier, hit with a weaponized nerve agent delivered by a dart gun. Finch's diagnosis wasn't just wrong, it was fatally wrong. The crash wasn't the primary event. The crash was a consequence. She looked at the orders Finch had scribbled on the chart. He had ordered a standard rapid sequence intubation protocol before transport to the ICU. That protocol included succinylcholine, a depolarizing neuromuscular blocker. To a patient exposed to an organophosphate or a similar nerve agent, Succinylcholine was a death sentence. It would cause catastrophic, irreversible muscle fasciculations, a massive release of potassium, and immediate cardiac arrest. He would die on the gurney before he even reached the elevator. And everyone would blame the trauma of the crash. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady beep of the monitor. Her past and present were colliding in this single, critical moment. The quiet, invisible nurse and the woman she used to be were at war inside her. Hiding was safe. Silence was survival. For 2 years, she had lived by that creed. She had let the world see a broken, timid woman because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. But the man on the gurney was dying, and she knew how to save him. She took a deep, shuddering breath and walked out of the trauma bay, her steps quick and purposeful. She found Finch at the central desk, holding court with a group of residents, regaling them with a story about a difficult surgery. "Dr. Finch!" Her voice was stronger than she expected. He turned, an annoyed expression on his face. "What is it, Hayes? Did you run out of soap?" The residents snickered. Alara ignored them. She kept her eyes locked on Finch. "The John Doe in Trauma 1. You can't give him succinylcholine." Finch's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Then his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Excuse me? Did you just presume to question my medical orders, Nurse Hayes?" "He has a puncture wound on his neck. His pupils are pinpoint. He's showing signs of cholinergic crisis. I think he's been exposed to a nerve agent. Succinylcholine will kill him." Each word was precise, clinical, stripped of all emotion. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Finch's face, but it was immediately replaced by outrage. The sheer audacity of it, to be questioned by her, the hospital mouse, in front of his disciples. "A nerve agent?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Have you been watching too many spy movies on your days off, Hayes? He was in a car accident. He has fractures. He is in hemorrhagic shock. He is not the victim of some fantasy assassination plot. Now get out of my sight and do the job you were told to do. Doctor, I'm telling you, that is enough," he roared, his voice echoing through the ER. Everyone stopped what they were doing. The air crackled with tension. "You are a nurse, a barely competent one at that. You will follow my orders, or you will be out of a job. Is that clear?" He gave her one last withering glare, then turned his back on her, pointedly resuming his conversation. The message was clear. She was dismissed. She was nothing. Alara stood frozen for a moment, the blood pounding in her ears. He was going to kill him. Out of pride. Out of pure, toxic arrogance. She turned and walked back toward Trauma 1. Not toward the exit. Not back to her menial tasks. She walked with a new kind of purpose. The stoop in her shoulders was gone. Her stride was long and confident. Inside the room, the anesthesiologist was preparing the intubation kit. He had a syringe filled with a clear liquid already drawn up. Succinylcholine. "I'll take it from here," Alara said. Her voice was calm, authoritative. It was a voice no one in this hospital had ever heard her use. The anesthesiologist, a young resident named Mark, looked up, confused. "Dr. Finch said to get him ready for transport." "Dr. Finch has been called to an emergency consult. The plan has changed," she lied, her gaze as steady as steel. Mark hesitated, but there was something in her tone, a sudden and absolute certainty that brooked no argument. He nodded slowly and stepped back. "Okay, let me know what you need." The moment he was out of the room, Alara moved. It was like watching a different person inhabit her body. The hesitant, fumbling nurse was gone. In her place was an operator. Her movements were fluid, economical, and blindingly fast. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. She grabbed the syringe of succinylcholine and squirted its contents into the biohazard bin. Her own locker was just down the hall. She didn't have time. She needed the antidote now. She ripped a panel off the side of her rolling supply cart. Taped to the inside was a small, vacuum-sealed pouch, her emergency kit. She had carried one just like it on every mission for 6 years. It contained a few essential, military-grade medical supplies that a civilian hospital would never stock. With practiced fingers, she tore it open. Inside were several pre-filled auto-injectors. She selected one marked ATNAA, atropine and pralidoxime chloride, the standard military antidote for nerve agent exposure. But this wasn't a standard exposure. The pinpoint wound, the rapid progression, it was something newer, more potent. It required a different protocol. A protocol that existed only in classified medical files and in her head. She ignored the ATNAA. Instead, she grabbed two separate vials. One was a high-concentration vial of atropine. The other, a drug a civilian doctor would never dream of using in this context, a specialized anticonvulsant. She drew up a massive dose of each into a single syringe, a cocktail she had been trained to administer in the most extreme circumstances. She turned back to the John Doe. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice low and intense. She found the central line in his neck, a direct conduit to his heart. She swabbed the port with alcohol and plunged the needle in. She pushed the plunger, sending the life-saving cocktail directly into his bloodstream. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Finch was standing in the doorway, his face purple with rage. He had seen her inject the patient. "I told you to prep him. I didn't tell you to play doctor. You just administered an unauthorized medication to my patient," he bellowed, storming into the room. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. "You're finished, Hayes. You are so far beyond fired." Alara didn't struggle. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were glued to the monitor. For a terrifying second, the John Doe's heart rate plummeted. The monitor screamed a shrill, flat-line tone. "You've killed him!" Finch shrieked, his face a mask of horrified fury. He shoved her away from the bed, reaching for the chest compressions. But then, a beat. A single, beautiful beep. And another. And another. The man's heart rate climbed back up, settling into a strong, steady rhythm. His blood pressure, which had been dangerously low, began to rise. 90/60. 100/70. 110/75. Stable. Finch stared at the monitor, his mouth agape. It was impossible. It made no medical sense. Ilara finally turned to look at him, her eyes cold. "I saved his life," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute conviction. "You would have killed him." The truth of her words, the undeniable evidence on the screen in front of him, was too much for Finch's ego to bear. His shock curdled back into rage. "Security!" he screamed into the hallway. "Security, get in here now!" Two burly guards rushed in, looking from Finch to Alara to the now stable patient. "This woman has assaulted a patient and disobeyed a direct order," Finch snarled, his voice shaking with venom. "I want her out of this hospital. Now. Escort her off the premises, and make sure she doesn't come back." The guards looked uncertainly at Alara. She didn't resist. She simply stood there, a strange calmness settling over her. She had done what she had to do. "You heard me. Get her out," Finch commanded. One of the guards took her arm gently. "Ma'am, you have to come with us." Alara nodded. As they led her out of the room, past the stunned faces of her colleagues, Finch delivered his final, cruel blow. "Don't even bother cleaning out your locker, Hayes. I'll have its contents incinerated with the rest of the trash." She was marched through the emergency room, the place that had been her sanctuary of anonymity for 2 years. Every eye was on her. Chloe looked like she was about to cry. Brenda, the veteran nurse, just watched her go, a look of grim, unreadable something on her face. They didn't stop until they were outside the main entrance. The security chief, a man named Henderson, cut her ID badge from her uniform with a pair of scissors. The snap of the plastic was deafeningly final. "I'm sorry, nurse," Henderson said, not unkindly. "Dr. Finch's orders." Alara just nodded, pulling her thin sweater tighter around herself. It had started to rain, a cold, miserable drizzle that matched the hollowness inside her. She had lost her job, her home, her carefully constructed refuge. She had saved a man's life, and it had cost her everything. She turned and began walking down the long access road that led away from the hospital, with no destination in mind. The city lights blurred through the rain on her eyelashes. Each step felt heavier than the last. The world she had tried so hard to build had just been demolished. Then she heard it. A low, guttural thumping. A sound that didn't belong in the urban symphony of sirens and traffic. It was a sound from her past, a sound that vibrated deep in her bones. Wub 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 wub. The sound of rotor blades. Not one helicopter, several, and they were close. She looked up. The rain was coming down harder now, but through the gray sheet of water and the low-hanging clouds, she saw them. 4 dark, menacing shapes descending from the sky. They weren't news choppers or police helicopters. Their profiles were angular, aggressive, unmistakable. UH-60 Blackhawks. Her heart stopped. They were moving with military precision, ignoring all flight protocols for the city. One peeled off, circling the hospital in a wide, protective orbit. The other 3 descended in perfect formation, their landing lights cutting brilliant, terrifying cones through the rain. They weren't aiming for the hospital's rooftop helipad. They were aiming for the 4-lane highway that ran directly in front of the main entrance. Cars screeched to a halt. Horns blared in a cacophony of panic and confusion. People screamed and ran for cover. The wind from the rotors blasted water and debris everywhere, turning the street into a miniature hurricane. With a final, ground-shaking roar, the 3 Blackhawks touched down on the asphalt, their black fuselages gleaming under the streetlights. Ramps slammed down before the rotors had even stopped spinning. From each helicopter, soldiers emerged. They were not police. They were not National Guard. They were clad in black, state-of-the-art tactical gear, their faces obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. They carried short-barreled rifles, holding them at a low, ready position. They moved with a chilling, silent efficiency, fanning out to form a secure perimeter around the hospital entrance. Hospital security guards spilled out of the doors, their hands held up in a gesture of placation. Dr. Finch was right behind them, his face a mixture of fear and indignant fury. This was his hospital, his domain. A single figure emerged from the lead helicopter. He was older than the soldiers, not in tactical gear, but in a perfectly pressed service uniform. His shoulders bore the silver stars of a general. His face was a mask of grim determination, carved from granite. He strode through the chaos as if he owned it, his eyes scanning the scene with an unnerving intensity. He ignored Finch completely. He walked up to Henderson, the security chief. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am General Marcus Vance of the United States Army. This hospital is now under temporary military jurisdiction. My men will not harm any civilians. We are not here for a fight. We are here for an asset." Finch pushed his way forward. "A general? What is the meaning of this? You can't just land helicopters in the middle of the street. This is a civilian hospital. I am the chief of staff here, and I demand an explanation." General Vance turned his head slowly, his cold eyes fixing on Finch. He looked at him for a long moment, a predator sizing up a yapping dog. "You are the one who is in charge of the John Doe that arrived an hour ago?" "He is my patient, yes," Finch said, puffing out his chest. "And I stabilized him. His condition is no longer critical." "His condition is stable because of the intervention of one of your nurses," the general stated, his voice flat. "An intervention for which I understand she was fired." Finch's face went pale. The general continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "My team is here to secure my asset. But first, we are here to find the person who saved his life. We're looking for a woman, a nurse. Her call sign is Angel." Alara stood frozen on the sidewalk, drenched and shivering, watching the scene unfold like a surreal dream. Angel. No one had called her that in years. It was a name from another world, a ghost she thought she had left behind in the dust of Afghanistan. One of the black-clad soldiers, sweeping the perimeter with his rifle, spotted her. He saw the lone figure standing in the rain, watching them. He raised his hand to his helmet comms. "Sir, I have a visual. Lone female, 50 meters, you're 9 o'clock." General Vance turned. His eyes, sharp and familiar, scanned the darkness and found her. For a moment, his stern expression softened. A flicker of something like relief, like pride, crossed his face. He started walking toward her, leaving a stunned and sputtering Dr. Finch behind. The soldiers parted for him, their silent vigilance never wavering. He walked right up to her, his polished boots stopping inches from her worn-out sneakers. The rain dripped from his uniform. He didn't seem to notice. "Alara," he said, his voice softer now, but still carrying the weight of command. "We got the signal from your beacon. I came as fast as I could." She couldn't speak. Her throat was tight with 1,000 unspoken emotions. He was her old CO, the man who had trained her, who had decorated her for bravery, and who had ultimately signed her honorable discharge papers when the ghosts became too much to bear. "The John Doe," she finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. "Is he—" "Captain Thorne," Vance finished for her. "He's one of my best men. He was transporting sensitive materials when his convoy was ambushed. You saved his life, Alara. The telemetry from your beacon told us everything. The toxin, the antidote you administered. No one else would have known the protocol." He looked at her drenched clothes, her pale face, the way she was shivering. His expression hardened again, this time with a cold, protective anger. "They fired you for it." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Alara just nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the rain on her cheek. "Not acceptable," the general said, his voice like grinding stones. "That is not acceptable." He turned back toward the hospital. "Come with me." He didn't wait for her answer. He simply expected her to follow. And she did. She fell into step just behind his left shoulder, the way she had 1,000 times before on dusty forward operating bases. A squad of 4 soldiers fell in around them, forming a protective diamond. They moved as one unit, back toward the entrance, back toward the man who had cast her out. The scene at the entrance was one of utter confusion. Finch was trying to reassert his authority, shouting at the soldiers who blocked his path. "I am the chief of this hospital. You have no jurisdiction here." Then he saw them, General Vance, returning. And walking with him, surrounded by an honor guard of elite soldiers, was the mousy, incompetent nurse he had fired less than an hour ago. The look on Finch's face was a masterpiece of disbelief, shock, and dawning horror. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Vance didn't break stride. He walked right up to Finch until they were inches apart. The general was not a tall man, but in that moment, he towered over the surgeon. "Dr. Finch," Vance began, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have 2 choices. You can cooperate fully, in which case my men and I will be out of your hospital with our asset inside of 30 minutes. Or you can continue to obstruct a critical matter of national security, in which case I will have you arrested and detained in a place where your prestigious career will mean less than nothing. Do you understand me?" Finch could only nod, his face ashen. "Good," Vance said. He then gestured toward Alara. "As of this moment, this woman is in command of all medical decisions regarding Captain Thorne. Her authority on this matter supersedes yours, the hospital board's, and anyone else's in this building. You will give her anything she requires. Staff, equipment, access. Anything. And you will address her not as Nurse Hayes, but by her proper title, Major Vance." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "She is my daughter, and she is one of the most decorated combat medics in the history of special operations. You fired a hero, Doctor, and you nearly cost me one of my best men." A collective gasp went through the crowd of hospital staff who had gathered to watch. Chloe's jaw was on the floor. Brenda, the veteran nurse, had a slow, wide smile spreading across her face. Finch looked at Alara, at Major Alara Vance, as if seeing her for the first time. The hunched shoulders, the downcast eyes, the timid demeanor, it was all gone. She stood tall, her gaze level and cold, her presence radiating a quiet, lethal competence that he had been too arrogant to see. "Now," General Vance said, turning his back on the humiliated surgeon. "Major, give me a status report on my captain." Alara's voice, when she spoke, was clear and strong, the voice of a commander. "He's stable for now, sir. I administered a counteragent, but the toxin is aggressive. He needs continuous monitoring and potentially further doses. We need to move him to a secure location with advanced life support capabilities." "The hospital's ICU is top of the line," Finch began, desperate to reclaim some shred of relevance. "This hospital is compromised," Alara cut him off without a second glance. The dismissal was more brutal than any shout. "The attack on Captain Thorne was professional. They will have a contingency. They may already have someone inside." Her words sent a chill through the air. The ER was no longer a sanctuary. It was a potential kill zone. "My thoughts exactly," General Vance agreed. "We have a secure facility ready. We can have him prepped for transport in 10 minutes. No, sir, Alara said firmly. That's what they'll expect. A full military evac. It's too high profile. They'll hit the transport. Vance looked at his daughter, seeing the strategist, not just the medic. What do you suggest, Major? A decoy, she said, her mind working rapidly, clicking through tactical scenarios. We make it look like we're prepping him for air evac. Load a dummy onto one of the helicopters. The real transport needs to be low profile. A standard ambulance, leaving through the morgue's loading bay. No lights, no siren. We'll take him to the old safe house. The cabin. The general nodded slowly, a flicker of pride in his eyes. The cabin at Mirror Lake. Off-grid. Defensible. Good thinking. But it's not equipped. I'll make it equipped, Alara said. Give me 10 minutes, a gurney, and full access to this hospital's supply closets. I'll turn an ambulance into a mobile ICU. She turned and looked at Chloe, the young nurse who was still staring, wide-eyed. You, Alara said, her voice softening slightly but still firm. Your name is Chloe, right? I need your help. Your hands are steady. Chloe snapped to attention as if zapped with a cattle prod. Yes, Major. Alara gave a faint, wry smile. Just Alara is fine. Now come on, we have work to do. As Alara and Chloe hurried back into the ER, a new energy crackling around them, General Vance turned to his soldiers. You heard the Major. Prep a decoy for air evac. I want a full, noisy show. The rest of you, secure a transport. Ambulance from the motor pool. Have it at the morgue entrance in 10 minutes. Silent running. The soldiers moved to obey without a word. Finch was left standing alone in the middle of the chaos, a ghost in his own kingdom. His authority had evaporated. His world had been turned upside down by the very person he had sought to crush. He was irrelevant, and he was terrified. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. He had to make a call. He had to warn them. He had taken their money, given them assurances. Now a whole damn army unit was here. His complicity was about to be exposed. He slipped away from the commotion, ducking into a deserted hallway, his heart pounding with a new kind of fear. Inside the ER, Alara was a blur of motion. She barked out a list of equipment and medications to a stunned but willing Chloe. A portable ventilator, a multi-channel infusion pump, cardiac drugs, intubation kits, suction catheters. She stripped supplies from the crash carts and storage rooms with a practiced, ruthless efficiency. She was no longer hiding. The mask was off. This was who she was. A woman forged in the crucible of combat. A specialist in keeping people alive under the worst conditions imaginable. She was in her element. In Trauma 1, Captain Thorne lay unconscious, a silent testament to the battle being waged for his life. Alara worked over him, rechecking his vitals, adjusting his IV drips, her touch both gentle and firm. How did you know? Chloe asked in a hushed, awestruck voice as she handed Alara a sterile pack. About the nerve agent? No one else saw it. You learn to see the things that don't belong, Alara said, her focus never wavering from her patient. In a car wreck, you expect broken bones and bleeding. You don't expect pinpoint pupils and muscle rigidity. The story didn't fit the injuries. A soldier appeared at the door. Ma'am, ambulance is ready. Let's move, Alara commanded. They transferred Thorne to their gurney, now laden with a precarious but secure mountain of life-saving equipment. Flanked by soldiers, they moved through the back corridors of the hospital, a silent, urgent procession. As they passed a janitor's closet, Alara's head snapped up. She held up a hand, halting the team. The soldier in front of her immediately raised his rifle. What is it, Major? He whispered. Alara's eyes were narrowed, her senses on high alert. It was a feeling, a subtle shift in the air, a scent that was out of place. It wasn't the hospital's antiseptic smell. It was a faint, cloying sweetness, a cleaning agent not used on this floor. Someone's here, she breathed. The door to the janitor's closet burst open. A man in an orderly's uniform lunged out, not at the soldiers, but at her, at the gurney. In his hand was not a gun, but a large syringe filled with a dark, oily liquid, potassium chloride, a fast, silent way to stop a heart. The soldiers were trained for firefights, for overt threats. They were not expecting a silent, close-quarters attack from a man disguised as staff, but Alara was. Her reaction was not thought. It was pure, honed instinct. In the split second the assassin lunged, she moved. She shoved the gurney hard into Chloe, pushing her and Captain Thorne out of the immediate danger zone. Then she pivoted on the ball of her foot, her body coiling and uncoiling like a spring. She didn't try to block the hand with the syringe. She moved inside the arc of his attack, her left hand grabbing his wrist, her right hand striking upwards, the heel of her palm connecting with explosive force under his nose. There was a sickening crunch of breaking bone and cartilage. The assassin screamed, a gurgling, wet sound. The syringe flew from his nerveless fingers. Alara didn't stop. She maintained her grip on his wrist, twisted it back at an unnatural angle, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the wall. A sharp crack echoed in the hallway as his arm broke. He collapsed to the floor, moaning and incapacitated. It had taken less than 3 seconds. The soldiers stared, their rifles still pointed, their minds catching up to the blur of violence they had just witnessed. They had come to protect a nurse. They had just watched a warrior neutralize a threat before they could even react. Alara stood over the downed assassin, her chest heaving, adrenaline singing through her veins. She looked at the syringe on the floor, then back at the man. She had been right. The hospital was compromised. General Vance arrived, drawn by the commotion on his comms. He took in the scene at a glance. The downed assassin, the shattered syringe, the stunned look on his soldiers' faces, and his daughter standing over the threat, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen since her last tour. "Report, Major," he said, his voice tight. "Contact. Single hostile, disguised as staff. Attempted to administer a lethal injection to the asset. Threat neutralized," she reported, her voice clinical, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her. "Get him out of here," Vance ordered 2 of his men, gesturing to the groaning assassin. He then turned to Alara. "You were right. We need to leave. Now." They moved, faster this time. They reached the morgue's loading bay, a cold, sterile space that smelled of bleach. The ambulance was waiting, its engine off, its interior dark. Outside, they could hear the dramatic thumping of the Black Hawk taking off from the highway. The decoy. The perfect distraction. They loaded Captain Thorne into the back of the ambulance. The space was cramped with all the equipment Alara had gathered. "I'm going with him," Alara said. It wasn't a request. "You'll have a 2-man security detail in the back with you," Vance said. "I'll be in the lead vehicle. We'll be in constant communication." He paused, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Be safe, Alara." "Always am, Dad," she replied, the corner of her mouth ticking up in a ghost of a smile. She climbed into the back of the ambulance. The doors closed, plunging them into the dim light of the medical monitors. The engine started with a low rumble. Without sirens, without lights, they pulled out of the loading bay and melted into the city's late-night traffic. The escape was underway. For the next hour, the ambulance was a bubble of intense, quiet focus. Alara worked tirelessly. Her world shrunk to the man on the stretcher and the flickering numbers on her screens. The 2 soldiers sat in silence, their weapons ready, their respect for the woman beside them growing with every passing minute. They had heard whispers of the general's daughter, the legendary Angel of Kandahar, but the stories paled in comparison to the reality. Captain Thorne remained unconscious, a passenger in his own fight for survival. Alara adjusted his drips, monitored his neurological status, and fought to keep the complex chemical storm of the toxin at bay. "ETA, 5 minutes to the safe house," the driver's voice crackled over the intercom. The ambulance turned off the main road, onto a dirt track that wound deep into a thick forest. The ride grew bumpy. The branches of pine trees scraped against the sides of the vehicle. Finally, they broke through into a clearing. Nestled by the edge of a dark, placid lake was a rustic 2-story cabin. It looked peaceful, idyllic. But Alara knew it was more than that. It had reinforced walls, bulletproof windows, and a state-of-the-art security system. It was a fortress, disguised as a vacation home. They quickly moved Thorne inside, setting him up in the downstairs bedroom, which had been designed for this very purpose. The house was powered by a silent generator, its systems coming online as soldiers swarmed the property, setting up a defensive perimeter. General Vance found Alara by Thorne's bedside. "The assassin from the hospital is talking," he said, his voice grim. "He's a mercenary, hired gun. He got his intel from someone on the inside, a doctor." Alara looked up. "Finch." "We pulled his phone records. He made a call to a burner phone 10 minutes after he fired you," Vance confirmed. "The number traces back to a shell corporation owned by Omnicorp." Omnicorp? Alara asked. The pharmaceutical giant? The very same, Vance said. We've suspected for months that they've been running a Black Ops R&D division, developing weaponized chemical agents for sale to the highest bidder. Captain Thorne's mission was to secure a sample of their latest product, a neurotoxin codenamed Chimera. That's what's in his system. The pieces clicked into place. The ambush, the advanced toxin, Finch's panic. He wasn't just an arrogant surgeon. He was a paid conspirator in an act of corporate espionage and murder. They know he survived, Alara stated, and Finch knows where we are. He doesn't know about this place, Vance countered. It's off every map. Only a handful of people in the world know it exists. Finch knows you're my father, Alara reasoned, her mind racing. He knows your history. He could have dug into your past, found old properties, former team members' assets. A man that desperate and that compromised will look for every possible angle. We have to assume they're coming. Her words were prophetic. Just as she finished speaking, a proximity alarm chirped from the command post set up in the living room. "Sir," a soldier called out. "Multiple vehicles approaching. Fast! No transponders!" The peaceful night was shattered. The forest outside erupted in a blaze of headlights. The sound of high-performance engines echoed across the lake. This was not a stealthy infiltration. This was a full frontal assault. "They're here," Vance said, his face grim. He keyed his radio. "All stations, this is command. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Defend the principal." The cabin, which had been a quiet medical ward moments before, transformed into a besieged bunker. Soldiers took up positions at the reinforced windows, their rifle optics scanning the darkness. Alara didn't panic. She went into combat mode. "Barricade this door," she ordered the two soldiers in the room with her. "And give me a weapon." One of the soldiers handed her his sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226, without hesitation. "You know how to use this, ma'am?" Alara took the pistol, her grip perfect, her movements practiced. She checked the magazine, racked the slide to chamber a round, and flicked off the safety. The feel of the cold steel in her hand was terrifyingly familiar. "I do," she said, her voice flat. Outside, the firefight began. The night was torn apart by the staccato rip of automatic weapons fire. The mercenaries, heavily armed and outnumbering Vance's small team, were laying down a field of suppressive fire, advancing through the trees. The bulletproof windows of the cabin held, but the impacts sounded like sledgehammers against steel. The whole house shuddered with each volley. Alara stayed with Thorne, using her own body to shield him from the direction of the heaviest fire. She was a medic, but she was also a soldier. Her first duty was to her patient. Her second was to fight. "Sir, they're using explosives! They're trying to breach the north wall!" a voice yelled from the other room. An explosion rocked the cabin, throwing Alara against the bed. Dust and splinters filled the air. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, lit only by the frantic flashes of gunfire outside and the green glow of the battery-powered medical monitors. "Generators hit!" someone shouted. They were losing. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Through a shattered window, Alara saw her father, General Vance, directing fire, a rifle in his hands. He was a commander, but he was a soldier first. Then she saw him stumble, clutching his shoulder, a dark stain spreading across his uniform. He was hit. Rage, cold and pure, surged through her. They had come for her patient. They had come for her family. They had cornered her. A fatal mistake. "Stay with him!" she yelled to one of the soldiers. "Keep him safe!" Before anyone could stop her, she was out of the room, moving low and fast through the chaotic darkness of the cabin. She found her father being dragged to cover by another soldier. "Sir, you're hit!" the soldier said. "It's just a scratch," Vance grunted, but his face was pale with pain. Alara was on him in a second, ripping open his uniform to expose the wound. It was a through and through, but it had missed the artery. He was lucky. She quickly applied a pressure dressing, her hands working surely in the strobing darkness. "They've breached the back door!" a soldier screamed from the kitchen. The fight was now inside the house. The sounds of close-quarters combat, short, controlled bursts of gunfire, shouts, the thud of bodies hitting the floor, were terrifyingly close. Alara finished patching up her father. "Stay down," she ordered. She kept the pistol, its weight a grim comfort in her hand. She knew they were being pushed back toward the bedroom where Thorne lay helpless. The mercenaries were professionals. They were funneling them, collapsing the perimeter, creating a kill box. She retreated back to the bedroom, just as the last two soldiers defending the hallway were cut down. The doorway was now an open invitation. She took up a position behind the heavy oak bed frame, pulling a terrified Chloe down with her. The one remaining soldier stood by the door, laying down suppressive fire. Then, silence. The gunfire from outside stopped. The only sound was the crackling of the burning parts of the house and the steady, reassuring beep of Thorne's heart monitor. It was a trap. A large, heavily armored mercenary appeared in the doorway, a tactical shotgun in his hands. He was a giant of a man, moving with a predator's confidence. He saw the soldier and fired a single, deafening blast. The soldier was thrown back, his body armor absorbing the impact, but leaving him stunned and out of the fight. The mercenary stepped into the room, his weapon sweeping toward the bed. His eyes landed on Captain Thorne, his target. He never saw Ilara. She rose from behind the bed, the pistol held in a two-handed combat grip. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the mercenary's eyes widen in surprise. She saw the shotgun begin to swing toward her. Crack! Crack! 2 shots, fired in quick succession. A perfect double tap. Both rounds struck the mercenary in the center of his chest, just above his body armor, at the vulnerable spot where the collarbone meets the sternum. He staggered backward, a look of utter shock on his face, and then collapsed like a felled tree. Ilara stood over him, the pistol still aimed, her knuckles white. The timid nurse was well and truly gone. In her place stood the Angel of Kandahar, a protector forged in fire. The standoff was broken by the sudden, overwhelming sound of approaching helicopters and the deep thud of a heavy machine gun opening up from the sky. Reinforcements. The cavalry had arrived. The remaining mercenaries, their leader down and their position exposed, broke and fled into the night, hunted by the gunships that now owned the sky. The battle was over. The next morning, the sun rose over a scene of devastation. The cabin was riddled with bullet holes, the clearing littered with the detritus of battle. But they had held. Captain Thorne was alive. General Vance was wounded, but stable. And Ilara was covered in soot and blood, exhausted, but unbroken. Later that day, the world caught up. The story of the siege at Mirror Lake was locked down under national security, but the initial events at the hospital were now public knowledge. Omnicorp's stock was plummeting. Federal agents were raiding their headquarters. And Dr. Alistair Finch, believing the mercenaries had succeeded, believing he was in the clear, had called a press conference. Ilara watched it on the tablet inside a secure military transport, her father beside her, his arm in a sling. Captain Thorne, conscious now and lucid, watched from a stretcher. Finch stood at a podium in the hospital lobby, his face a mask of feigned sincerity and sorrow. He spun a tale of a rogue, unstable nurse, of violent military overreach, and his own heroic efforts to maintain order. Nurse Ilara Hayes acted recklessly, endangering a patient's life, he said, his voice resonating with false gravity. When I intervened, I was met with hostility and a shocking display of force by military personnel, who seemed to be acting on her delusional commands. This hospital, a place of healing, was violated. He's good, Thorne rasped, his voice weak but clear. He's very believable. Let's change that, General Vance said, nodding to the driver. The transport pulled up to the main entrance of the hospital, the same entrance where Ilara had been cast out just a day before. The doors to the lobby swung open, and Ilara walked in. She was not in a nurse's uniform. She was wearing a crisp army dress uniform, the one her father had brought for her. On its chest was a row of ribbons, testifying to her service and valor. The Silver Star, the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart. On her shoulder was the rank of Major. She was flanked by her father, General Vance, and 2 military police officers pushing Captain Thorne in a wheelchair. The press conference came to a dead halt. Every camera, every reporter, every eye in the room swung to them. Finch's face went from confident to confused to utterly horrified in the span of 5 seconds. He looked at Thorne, alive. He looked at Ilara, in her uniform. He looked at the grim-faced general. And he knew. He was finished. General Vance walked to the podium, gently moving Finch aside as if he were a piece of furniture. Dr. Finch has just given you his version of events, Vance said, his voice booming through the silent room. Now I'd like to present you with the truth. He held up a small audio player and pressed a button. Finch's voice filled the lobby, tinny and panicked, from the recording of his call to the mercenaries. He's alive. The asset is still alive. A nurse, one of my nurses, interfered. Yes, a military-grade neurotoxin. You have to clean this up. I don't care what it costs. Terminate the asset, and terminate the nurse. She knows too much. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, damning. Finch began to tremble, his face a ghastly shade of white. That's a fake. It's doctored. I'm being framed, he stammered. But no one was listening. Two men in dark suits and earpieces, federal agents, were already moving toward him. Dr. Alistair Finch, one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, violations of federal espionage acts, and aiding and abetting a hostile foreign entity. They snapped handcuffs on his wrists. The proud, arrogant surgeon crumpled. He started to weep, pathetic, broken sobs of self-pity. No! You can't do this to me! I'm the chief of surgery! I'm a respected doctor! He wailed as they dragged him away through the stunned crowd. The cameras turned back to Alara. She stood tall, her face a calm mask, watching her tormentor's final, ignominious fall. General Vance stepped back to the microphone. This woman, he said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder, is Major Alara Vance. Yesterday, in this very hospital, she correctly diagnosed a chemical weapons attack and saved the life of Captain Thorne. For this, she was dismissed and humiliated. Last night, she defended him again, this time from a team of trained assassins. She is not a rogue. She is a hero. And any institution that would cast out a person of her caliber and courage in favor of a man like Alistair Finch needs to take a long, hard look at its values. A single person began to clap. It was Chloe, standing at the back of the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Then Brenda, the veteran nurse, joined in, her applause loud and defiant. Within seconds, the entire lobby was filled with a thunderous ovation. For Alara. For the hero who had walked among them, unseen. Later, after the storm had passed, Alara stood with her father and Captain Thorne in a quiet office overlooking the city. Her hospital administrator had already called, offering her job back, a promotion, a public apology, anything. She had politely declined. So what now, Major? Thorne asked from his wheelchair. He was still weak, but his eyes were sharp and filled with an overwhelming gratitude. Back to the quiet life? Alara looked out the window, at the endless expanse of the city. She had thought that's what she wanted. Anonymity. Peace. But she realized now that hiding from who you are is not peace. It's a prison. We're starting a new unit, General Vance said, answering for her. A small, elite team. A QRF for situations just like this. Part medical, part tactical. It'll operate outside the normal chain of command, with the authority to go anywhere, do anything, to save our people. He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with love and respect. It needs a commander, someone who knows both sides of the coin, someone who knows how to heal and how to fight. We want you to build it, Alara. We want you to lead it. It was a daunting offer, a return to the world that had scarred her. But it was also a chance to be whole again, to use all of her skills, all of her training, all of who she was, without apology, to never have to be small again. She looked from her father to Captain Thorne. He was smiling, a look of profound respect on his face. The unit will need a head of security, he said, assuming I'm cleared for duty after this. Alara met his gaze, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something other than grief or fear. She felt hope. She felt a future. She turned to her father, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. I accept, General. She walked away from the window, away from the view of the life she was leaving behind. She walked toward her father and her new partner, toward the next mission. She was no longer Nurse Hayes, the ghost in the halls. She was Major Alara Vance, and she was finally home. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Major Alara Vance teaches us a powerful lesson about judging others. People like Dr. Finch, who are blinded by arrogance and status, often fail to see the true worth and hidden strengths in those they deem beneath them. Ilara, who appeared meek and incompetent, was in reality a highly skilled and courageous hero. This reminds us that true strength is not about titles or authority, but about character, integrity, and the courage to do the right thing, even when it costs you everything. It shows that in the end, doing the right thing always pays off, and that true heroes are often found in the most unexpected places. Never judge a book by its cover, because you never know when the person you underestimate might be the only one who can save you. What would you have done if you were in Ilara's position? Would you have risked your job to save a patient against a powerful doctor's orders? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.
Have a nice rest of your day.